Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different, and honestly, a lot more exciting. We are literally cracking open the highly confidential war room blueprint of Project Ignis. We're going to see exactly how a top-tier climate tech startup goes about constructing a literal empire. You see, we aren't just skimming through some basic pitch deck here. We are diving deep into the operational, financial, and strategic architecture of a company that's built from the ground up to take a massive national crisis and turn it into a highly scalable, absolutely unstoppable cash flow engine. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about, we have to start with this staggering number, $134.7 billion. That is India's annual crude oil import bill. It represents a massive 88.5% import dependency, which, by the way, is a record high. Think about that for a second. That is a colossal amount of capital permanently leaving the country, leaving the economy totally exposed to huge geopolitical volatility and crazy price shocks. Now hold that thought and look at the flip side. We have this equally massive, headache-inducing number, 9.3 million tons. That's the amount of plastic waste India is generating every single year. And the truly alarming part, the part that keeps city planners awake at night, less than 30% of that is actually collected. The vast majority of it is just out there, choking rivers, overflowing in landfills, and creating a highly visible, toxic nightmare in practically every municipality. So on the surface, you've got these two distinct, massive national crises, right? Bleeding billions for foreign fuel on one hand, and literally drowning in domestic waste on the other. But here is the genius of Project Ignis. They look at these two data points, and they see the exact same problem, just waiting for a single, unified solution. Because at the end of the day, plastic is literally just made from crude oil. The core thesis here is as simple as it is revolutionary. India's plastic waste is actually its own domestic oil reserve. To see how they plan to pull off this massive transformation, we're going to walk through their 5-part playbook. We'll look at how they map the dual crisis to one solution, how they pair an AI brain with industrial muscle, the math behind their unit economics, their blueprint for scaling sovereign fuel, and finally, how they are architecting a massive exit strategy. All right, let's jump right into part 1, tackling two crises with one solution. It all starts with treating plastic like what it actually is, oil. Here's the thing. Because the plastic feedstock is virtually free, Project Ignis can roll out a highly pragmatic 3-stage roadmap. Actually, scratch that. It's better than free. Under current extended producer responsibility, or EPR laws, big consumer brands are legally mandated to pay you to recycle their plastic. So you have a raw material that literally has negative cost, paired with an infinite localized demand for fuel. Phase 1 is super lean. Basic batch pyrolysis to create raw oil for industrial kilns. Low capital, fast cash flow. Phase 2 steps it up with distillation to create higher value diesel fractions. And then Phase 3 brings in hydroprocessing to pump out BIS-certified retail diesel. They aren't trying to build a billion-dollar refinery on day one. They're being smart. They're earning the right to scale. Which brings us to part 2, AI brain and industrial muscle. This is all about building an unbeatable operational moat. Now, you might be wondering, hey, if the chemistry is this straightforward, why do competitors keep failing? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Human error. Managing 500-degree thermal dynamics with a totally unpredictable mix of contaminated plastic is incredibly hard for an exhausted human crew. One tiny mistake, and boom, your reactor is full of useless wax instead of valuable oil. Or worse, it gets eaten alive by corrosive gases. That is exactly where Ignis introduces their secret weapon, the Agentic Intelligence OS. It's a suite of AI agents overlaid onto standard industrial hardware. You've got an optical sorting agent acting like a bouncer, detecting corrosive PVC before it ever gets into the reactor. A thermal dynamics agent perfectly tweaking the heating curve in real time. A governance safety agent acting as an absolute deterministic failsafe. And a commercial agent auto-generating compliance ledgers. It completely removes human fatigue from the equation. And this perfectly captures the Trojan horse analogy they pitch to the big investors. The founders say it straight up. Our competitors build dumb metal tubes. We build an intelligent energy infrastructure platform. It's brilliant, really. The physical plant, the steel reactors, and the miles of pipes, that's just the hardware. They can buy that off the shelf from standard manufacturers. But the AI operating system, that is the actual product. That's the true moat, keeping the system running flawlessly, allowing them to scale up without needing a master chemical engineer babysitting every single facility. Of course, any savvy investor is going to instantly spot the elephant in the room. What happens when the incoming plastic is severely contaminated? I mean, city waste can be gross. The company doesn't hide from this hard truth. They know PVC creates hydrochloric acid that literally eats steel reactors. They know PET plastics just turn into useless water instead of oil. To mitigate this massive risk, Ignis budgets heavily upfront for mechanical pre-sorting. They enforce incredibly strict quality limits in their aggregator contracts, and they rely on that AI optical sorting gatekeeper to aggressively reject bad feedstock. Okay, let's get into the math. Part 3, the unit economics blueprint, because the cost structure here is totally inverted. Let's be real. You can have the slickest AI in the world, but if the machine doesn't make money, it's just an expensive science project. The financial architecture of Ignis relies on totally inverted unit economics. Because the raw material costs absolutely nothing, the company is able to generate incredibly robust, stacked revenue streams. From just one single ton of plastic, they extract pyrolysis oil to sell to industrial buyers, carbon black char for rubber compounders, combustible syngas, which will actually loop back to power their own reactors, and those lucrative EPR certificates that big brands are desperate to pay top dollar for. When you break down the exact math, it's honestly fascinating. It shows exactly how those zero-cost inputs, combined with incredibly lean operating expenses, generate a staggering gross profit of 30,000 rupees per ton of plastic processed. Even at a super modest 10-ton per day scale in phase 1, that translates into massive, predictable monthly cash flow. And that cash flow is the secret sauce. It creates the financial runway they need to organically fund the later, much more capital-intensive phases. So, how do we take this massive profit margin and go huge? That brings us to part 4, scaling sovereign fuel. The absolutely crucial point here is how this super lean, incredibly profitable phase 1 operation paves the exact way for total market dominance. They aren't out there trying to raise 15 crore on day 1 with nothing but a dream. They raise a tiny fraction of that just to prove the AI works and the cash flows. Then they use that very momentum to scale up. Looking at their master timeline, you can see the snowball effect. It starts with that cash flow positive 10-ton facility. Then, boom, they raise a Series A to build a 50-ton distillation hub. By years 4 to 6, they bring in the heavy hitters, private equity, to fund the complex hydroprocessing for BIS-certified retail fuel. Over a 10-year horizon, the blueprint outlines a fully national 500-ton per day sovereign fuel network. And finally, part 5, architecting the empire exit, engineered liquidity from the very start. Because let's face it, top-tier investors don't just write massive checks simply to save the planet. And they definitely don't write them just because your AI sounds cool. They write checks for massive liquidity events, and those events have to be engineered from day 1. This is exactly why Project Ignis structures their top-level holding company in Singapore, while all the physical, messy operations stay on the ground in India. This creates a remarkably clean, incredibly investor-friendly jurisdiction. If a global energy major decides they want to acquire Ignis, they just buy the Singapore entity. This totally bypasses the headache of complex Indian foreign direct investment approvals and nasty cross-border tax frictions. It makes the company infinitely more attractive and acquirable. Inside their war room, they've basically mapped out 3 undeniable, absolute dream scenarios for an exit. First, there's the private equity roll-up, where mega funds like TPG or KKR buy them to consolidate a highly fragmented Indian market. Second, a strategic acquisition by massive fossil fuel behemoths, think Indian Oil or Shell, who desperately, frantically need to buy green credentials and software IP just to meet their net zero mandates. Or third, they go all the way with a massive public IPO on the Indian stock exchanges, perfectly riding the current wave of green energy enthusiasm. As we look at this final argument, you realize this isn't just a bet on some futuristic technology. The technology already works. The government mandates are already firmly in place. So as you reflect on this blueprint, ask yourself this. With a completely free, legally mandated supply of plastic waste on one side, and a literally endless, multi-billion-dollar demand for fuel on the other, isn't a circular energy empire just completely inevitable? The only real question left is, who builds it first?